Good God, I just cannot keep myself from talking about elves. I love elves. I love elves. I cannot say how much Has it been 15 seconds yet? Nah, I better play it safe. I stinkin' love elves. And Age of Sigmar writers pretty clearly agree with me, because you look at the dwarf factions and it's kinda mid, I can't lie. Carriage and Overlords are cool, don't get me wrong, but there's not a lot of them available. And whoever was in charge of the Fire Slayers clearly showed up to work drunk 90% of the time and left after 4 hours of staring blankly at their computer. They're very underwhelming, is the point I'm trying to make. But the Elves of Age of Sigmar, or Elves if you're a simp for copyright, good golly are they getting some love. Certainly more than the Eldar, though that's hardly a high bar to reach. We've got the Sylvaneth, who on the one hand are mostly tree people, but on the other have models that are clearly elven spirits coming out of trees. And there's Alariel, an elf god, so the faction still counts. Then there's of course the Eidon the Deepkin, who are a phenomenally creative interpretation of the elves, I must say. And of course, the topic of today's video, the Lumineth Realm Lords. If you like the high elves, then I must say are you in for a treat, because these guys are the high elves. Without giving too much away right off the bat, that's certainly what they are, the ultimate expression of the archetypical high elves. Long lives, very good at magic, and unbelievably arrogant, which is, of course, a quality they have 100% earned. If you wanted an unbiased video on the Lumineth Realm Lords, then you can piss off elsewhere. You're an elf simp land now, chief. So instead of seeing if the Lumineth are or aren't the army for you, let's see why they're the army for you in Warhammer Age of Sigmar. The Lumineth Realm Lords are the highest high elves to ever elf. No, I will not refer to them as elves, they are elves. As with the other major elf faction in AOS, their story begins inside of Slaanesh as all the elves that she ate from the old world. Tyrion, Teclis, and Malekith beat the snot out of her till she started vomiting up elf souls, and Marathi was there the whole time, existing in the background. Yeah, she helped them set the trap for Slaanesh, but she wasn't a god yet, so once Slaanesh was there, she probably just held back. Anyways, after they started extracting the souls from Slaanesh, Tyrion and Teclis went to work with their share of souls and created the Eidon the Deepkin. And from the standpoint of gods trying to recreate their old civilization from before, they sucked. They were not the high elves at all. So Teclis almost killed them all and started over. The Lumineth Battle Tome mentions that there were a couple more failures after them, but eventually they figured it out. The High Elves are back, baby, ruling over the realm of Hysh, light. Tyrion and Teclis taught them everything they knew. Tyrion taught them how to do the stabby stabs real good and all that physical might stuff that Teclis was never too good at in the old world. And Teclis taught them philosophy, craftsmanship, and how to shoot lasers at people who piss you off with magic. And thus did the Realm Lords spread across Hysh and make it their own. Elves as far as the eye can see, a paradise unrivaled. They all desired to reach enlightenment as the perfect little society of elves, and fair's fair, for a while it wasn't going bad for them by any means. Now, this might seem like a bit of a tangent, but the Lumineth have this thing called Aether Quartz. It's the Realmstone of Hysh, basically each of the 8 realms versions of Warpstone, only a lot less shitty to handle for the most part. And aside from being a nifty little magical rock, the Lumineth use it to boost their physical or magical prowess. Problem is, they get addicted to it. They also got incredibly full of themselves, even regardless of the Aether Quartz, more so than even the Eldar are high elves. Part of it was knowing that since Slaanesh was locked away, they felt they were safe. Surely their gods could deal with her again if they did so once, right? This, dear viewer, is what we call foreshadowing. Of course, there was also the fact that while during the Age of Myth in AOS, chaos wasn't much of a problem for a while, even ignoring Slaanesh being imprisoned. Towards the end it started popping up, but for a while they just weren't a problem. So the Lumineth started getting a little bit too full of themselves and their magic, and created some real spicy stuff. They started building magical superweapons and shit that were of course only built for artistic purposes. They didn't plan on using it, they just wanted to show that they could. Yeah, and the Death Star was an art project. Tyrion and Teclis were too blinded by pride in remaking the High Elves to really do anything about it, at least according to the Battle Tome. Witty remarks between nation-states turned into bitter insults. And then some artist apparently decided, hang on a minute, there's a giant fuck-off laser in the garage I'm using as a conversation piece. What if I turned it on? And then the entire realm of Hysh turned into a war zone of apocalyptic proportions. This was known as the Spirefall, or Akari Dara if you prefer elf speak. Of note is that there wasn't one big cause of this like the Eldar Empire ending in an instant because Slaanesh was suddenly a thing. Instead, a bunch of different little escalations led to further and further ones until people were breaking out the nukes. Because of this, you can't really pin down an exact date on when everything went wrong, even beyond Age of Sigmar hating the concept of dating things. Regardless of timeline specifics, the nations of the Lumineth turned on each other and did their best to unmake the realm realm with magic. And eventually, demons started showing up because no one was really checking to see if their magical weapons were being environmentally friendly or anything like that. And who else was leading the charge but the demons of Slaanesh? Probably should have double-checked she couldn't still eat elves by proxy. So between chaos, their own hubris and idiocy, they nearly wiped themselves out. Tyrion rallied who was left to defend the realm, and Teclis decided to go on a month-long holiday. He came back with the spirit of Haisha's moon, Selenar, and so began the reinvention wars of the Lumineth. Literally, I mean, that's what they call this period in the conflicts, the reinvention. Not exactly subtle naming, but sometimes you need a hell of a reality check to wake yourself up with. Can't say I haven't been there, to be honest. After that, instead of attempting to achieve superiority by way of the usual elf method of being better than everyone else, they do so by binding with the spirits of Haish. As they began taking on Teclis' teachings, they also took to the fight against chaos, slowly but surely purging it from the realm. This is the in-universe reason why they weren't in the game for a while. They were very insular and focused solely on their own realm for a good amount of time. This is what Sigmar did before he created the Stormcast, by the way, so before you go stupid selfish elves or something like that, the Hammer God did the exact same damn thing. Of course, during all this time, they weren't completely blind to the outside world. Morathi kept bitching and moaning about Slaanesh eventually breaking out, and Teclis took her seriously. Granted, part of it will be her fault if/when it happens, but at least she warned people. Teclis also knew the other gods like Malekith were going to be up to something sooner or later, and he made sure to keep an eye on Nagash specifically for that exact reason. He is Nagash after all, you know he's going to do something awful eventually. He had the Lumineth set up systems specifically designed to counter death magic, and when the Necroquake hit, the Lumineth had defenses in place to keep the worst of the problems at bay. It still came under assault from all sorts of nasty creatures, but it was more like millions of Nighthaunt throughout Haish instead of billions like everywhere else. And when it came time for them to throw down, boy did they throw down. They more or less single-handedly stopped Nagash from control-alt-deleting the mortal realms. Eltharion got revenge, an entire sequel in the making, and threw Archon straight into the Minecraft void. Meanwhile, Teclis smashed Nagash so hard with some help from a bunch of human wizard cannons that he exploded and lost his body. Sure, the whole affair crippled him, but that's just a return to form for Teclis. He also helped stop the Necroquake, so the Lumineth have been quite busy stealing the Stormcast role of heroes who come down and save everyone. Then the era of the Beast came around, and the Lumineth's response to Kragnos and all the orcs and ogres and whatnot running around everywhere was to bunker down and hope it stops sooner rather than later. Which is kind of a downgrade from clowning on Nagash, but it's a great shield for me to throw up when someone calls them a Mary Sue faction. Tzeentch, being a magic god, likes messing with them every now and then since they're a bunch of elven wizards, and despite currently being little more than a particularly angry ghost, Nagash has changed his mind from largely ignoring the Lumineth to sending massive armies of the dead at them every time Teclis blinks. But despite all this, the Lumineth are spreading across the realms in brilliant war host unrivaled by any other. Unrivaled by any other because I love elves and elves are the best, so the Lumineth are the best. For some non-storyline background, they've divided their nations in warfare into Tyrionic and Teclian schools. Teclis' school teaches you to be wise and intelligent and wizardy and all that stuff, while Tyrion's school teaches you to be decisive and brave, while also not being a rash idiot who would draw a cursed sword that's been plaguing his bloodline for millennia. Nice to see Tyrion's gotten some character development, even if it took the last setting blowing up for him to learn his lesson. Largely the focus has been on the Teclian schools for characters and whatnot, but there's still been some influence from the Tyrion side of things, and I don't doubt that we'll get more elves who prefer stabbing to wizardry in the future. The book teases Tyrion is scouting out Malekith's own realm, which seems like a pretty big tease for a future box set of a reforged Dark Elf sort of faction against Tyrion. There's also a bunch of different nations of Lumineth that resemble the High Elven kingdoms of old, just tweaked to reflect the Lumineth lore rather than the High Elves just being transplanted into the future. There's two things about Teclis specifically before we move on I want to bring up now, because I can't really fit them into the pros or cons section, but I really want to talk about them. One is that when Nagash started being himself, you know, the biggest asshole ever, he called the god Teclis of Ulthuan, and Teclis had some flashbacks to his life as a crippled mortal elf lying in bed watching Tyrion train to be the ultimate hero. It's nice to see something from Warhammer Fantasy referenced and actually directly named, rather than just the world that was and all other sorts of roundabout little ways to avoid just saying the words Warhammer Fantasy or directly naming anything from it. The second fun little fact is that when any Lumineth mages speak with Teclis and his spirit companion Selenar, they outright tell him they prefer to learn from Selenar, which is hilarious. They tell him that while he's very wise, they prefer to learn from the source. They're very respectful about it, and they're still happy for his teachings, but as far as they see it, Selenar is the one who enlightened Teclis about the changes made to Lumineth society, so he's probably the better thing to go to. Teclis is just a bit bitter over this, but it makes Tyrion laugh his ass off. Not really super important for background or anything, I just just find that phenomenal. Imagine you're an ancient Greek soldier, and the goddess Nike herself comes around and offers to teach you strategy and tactics and whatnot. Instead of immediately bowing down and going, "Of course, great goddess, thank you, you go. Nah, I'd rather learn from Athena. Thanks for coming by though, appreciate the visit." Poor old Teclis just can't catch a break even though he's a god now. Now to begin the lore prose of the Lumineth. Like I said earlier, if you like high elves, then are you in for a good time, because these are the highest high elves to ever exist. They make the Thalmor look humble. They're so goddamn magical that a lot of people in the mortal realms thought they were made of pure light when they first made their grand reappearance. They bond with elemental spirits to become both spiritually enlightened and enhance their arrogance, as well as become even more magical. And as for them being a sequel to the Aesir of fantasy, there's even a few pretty goddamn direct equivalents they have. Lyrior Uthrale, aside from having a name that's very hard to say when you're drunk, is pretty much just Tyrion crossed with the old Eltharion. Meanwhile, Alania and Elethor are Tyrion and Teclis 2.0, with Teclis even outright saying as much and training them for that reason. You've got your classic elven spearwall to tell anyone to go to hell, you are not getting through this battle line today, and the Venari Blade Lords are quite reminiscent of the Swordmasters of Hoeth. Not to mention that Teclis and Eltharion are just straight up back. Sure, Eltharion is just Alphonse from Full Metal Alchemist now, but that just means that Arkan couldn't age him the dust this time before Eltharion put his ass in the dirt. But in saying that, they've also changed a decent bit from the high elves of old. Aside from various lore differences like their arrogance coming from a source of enlightenment nowadays, which is funny to think about, but I digress, their special units have been mixed up quite a bit. Instead of dragons and whatnot, they now have big giant cow mountain monster. Well, if you just wanted a copy and paste of the high elves in AOS, you might be disappointed. I think this is a good thing. Sure, it's a damn shame I can't get my hand on old high elven models anymore aside from eBay listings at 500 times market value, but the fact the Lumineth are their own unique thing while still being a high elf faction is nice. The kangaroo horse things are very weird and out there, but in a good and goofy kind of way, and overall there's a lot of creativity behind this army. Speaking of being different to high elves, are you sick of elves always being a dying race? If so, then step right up. Not only are they not dying out, the Lumineth have in fact been reclaiming lost territory and spreading holdouts throughout the lands for some time now. While Slaanesh still likes elven souls, in fantasy she doesn't just instantly hoover them up upon one of them dying. Even back in original fantasy, they had time to run to a waystone or wait for an elf god to grab them before Slaanesh did. And now that she's locked up, it's even harder to grab elf souls than ever before. Beyond that, they have no problems with either horribly declining birth rates or their main powers in the mortal realms wanting them dead because Xeno bad. That's not to say everyone loves them, but for once you don't have to always have the fact your race is on the back foot hanging over your army if you want to go for the Lumineth, which I gotta say is a very refreshing change of pace for Warhammer. They also get out into the realms quite a bit more than the Eldar ever have, or even the High Elves for that matter. There's a lovely little city called Settler's Gain, where the Lumineth live in perfect and not at all brainwash-induced harmony with humans and dwarfs. The Lumineth believe that it's been such a great success that they plan on forming other settlements like it across Hysh and beyond. They even helped form magical colleges across the realms, much like Teclis did for the Empire of Man of old. The Lumineth are quite willing to play the role of big damn heroes, rather than sitting on their island or craft world and hoping to God the lesser races behave for more than 5 minutes at a time. And while I'll be coming back to Settler's Gain in the con section, it's important to note that there are genuine benefits to living there that you can't really get elsewhere. Magical automata do most of the menial work as well as things like farming and whatnot, so pretty much everyone in it trains to be scholars, philosophers, and mages. If that sounds like a bunch of cringy liberal arts major bullshit to you, remember this is a Warhammer setting and that training to be a philosopher mage involves practicing the best way to melt the face off of demons trying to eat yours, as well as debates on the meaning of life and all that crap. The human forces I mentioned earlier that helped Teclis defeat Nagash indeed came from here, so there's clearly something that's working out. If you want good guys, the Lumineth do a pretty good job at that too, by Warhammer standards. While yes, it may be typical elven arrogance, they do genuinely believe that their way is the best way to not only live, but to push back the forces of darkness. And they've had enough success with it that maybe there's something to that. Lumineth armies frequently show up without warning in defense of the settlements of other factions, happy to stand against chaos wherever it rears its ugly head. Eltharion even leads forces of all races against chaos, the undead, and more. Oh, and if you love ancient Greece, you'll love the Lumineth. The elven gods have always been rather reminiscent of the Greek pantheon, and Ulthuan may as well have just been Atlantis with pointier ears. But now, I mean, just look at them. Those are hoplites. They may be called Venari Arlen Wardens, but come on, these are hoplites with pointier ears and even taller helmet crests. Now, I of course love elves the most, but that doesn't mean I dislike dwarfs. And if you're like me and also have a healthy respect for the stunties, then the Lumineth are definitely worth a look at the very least. They use magic to shape rocks, use magical crystals for power and more, and overall have come around to the dwarf idea that stone is quite a handy material to work with. Their mega unit, aside from Teclis, is wearing a mountain range on its shoulders. Clearly the Lumineth know how to rock and stone. One of their wizards is straight up called a stone mage, and you'll notice more than a few warhammers in a full Lumineth army. So if you prefer elves but want a little sprinkling of dwarf in there, you want these guys. Of course, if you hate elves, then you will likely be raging at the audacity of these knife ears to be copying proper dwarven ingenuity with magic, but please take time to consider that you are wrong. Another positive that I hugely support is that the Lumineth have a wonderful built-in advantage against chaos and necromancy. Light magic in Warhammer has always been an anathema to chaos. While it's hard to control, it's very orderly and stable, the polar opposite of chaos. It's why all the spirits in the realm of Hysh are outright called geomantic. They're a bunch of cube ghosts. Thus, it's perfectly suited to turning back chaotic corruption. It is unbelievably nice to see magic being used as a hard counter to chaos, rather than someone casting a lightning bolt at a demon and then their head explodes. Similarly, its pure properties make flushing out necromancy and death magic a breeze too. And if all this sounds a bit too narratively convenient for the Lumineth, consider this. While the orcs may be the best at the whole belief becomes reality thing, it applies to all Warhammer races to some degree. And when you take something that by its nature is the polar opposite of the corruptive forces of Warhammer, train a bunch of people to use it well, and then have them be utterly convinced in their beliefs that not only is this the best way to fight chaos, but they're the best at it, I think it only makes sense that the Lumineth have had such success against chaos and the undead so far. It could even explain why they're kinda struggling with the forces of destruction. They don't give a shit about orderly lines or random chaos crap either way, they just want to smash stuff. Regardless, if you hate chaos like I do, the Lumineth are quite possibly the best army for you, because their entire realm of existence is a hard counter to it. Lastly, if you want a faction that is backed up by some serious power, you want the Lumineth. Now this might sound weird, I mean every Warhammer faction has some power behind it, but the Lumineth and their backstory outright built realm-destroying superweapons to unleash upon the world just because they could. They don't use them much anymore because the last time they did, things got a little bit fucky-wucky, but they haven't lost the capability to use them. They're ready to unleash hell if need be. Additionally, and admittedly this isn't exactly uncommon by AOS standards, their gods are actively throwing down on the battlefield. While it's only in the lore for now, Tyrion regularly fights to defend Hysh, Teclis does in both lore and tabletop, and the very spirits of the realm are actively helping to cleanse chaos from all the realms. These guys are damn near unstoppable. Now for some rules positives. Get ready because the Lumineth are coming to the tabletop in style. Do you like magic? Because boy howdy can the Lumineth do some magic. As long as your basic infantry unit has at least a handful of models left, it can cast spells. All of them can. Same for the Dawn Riders Cavalry. They all know the Power of Hysh spell, which guarantees mortal wounds on 5s or 6s. There's also plenty of more dedicated mage units as well, and of course, there's Teclis. Teclis is who you use when you want to hate-fuck the enemy in a submission with magic. He can cast up to 4 spells, and he's got some very fun rules for doing so. If he casts 4, guaranteed casting value of 10. Just a little FYI, at least according to the Lumineth Battle Tome and Wahapedia pages, none of the spells the Lumineth have available to them have a higher casting value than 10. So yeah, he's gonna be doing some magic. If you only do 2 spells, it's a guaranteed casting value of 12, and if you choose to just use a single spell, it's a guaranteed value of 12, and it cannot be unbound. He can also automatically unbind not only a single endless spell, but a single enemy spell as well. Because magic is an elf thing, you silly lesser race you. Sure, he's got a degrading stat line, and he loses the 1 spell guarantee thing first, but even at only guaranteed cast value of 10, he's gonna be throwing out magic missiles like you wouldn't believe. They also have, by my estimation, a whole lot of ways to cause mortal wounds, as well as generally increasing the amount of damage a unit can cause. The Power of Hysh spell I mentioned earlier is great for this, and there's plenty of other ways as well. For example, the spell Erasure. Pick a target and deal either D3 mortal wounds or mark the guy for erasure. If you hit him with the spell again, it does 2d6 mortal wounds. That's most heroes of the game dead or damn close to it, assuming the dice don't bend you over and you roll snake eyes. There's also the Star Shard Ballista. It has 3 attacks, hits on a 2-up, and wounds on a 3-up for D3 damage. If you hit a monster, it just deals 3 damage. It also has Rend too. It's gonna hurt you. You don't have a say in the matter. There's plenty more I could cover, but let's just leave it at they pack one hell of a punch. So you might think they've got pretty low defense to compensate for all the damage they do, right? No, they don't. Remember how I said they learned some things from the dwarves? In particular, they learned that armor more durable than tissue paper is worth using. Their troops generally have a 4-up save, and plenty of their melee heroes have 3-up saves. The only things that generally have 5-up saves are wizards and their ranged units, who should either be behind your phalanx or so far away that they don't need to use that save. Oh no, the artillery piece has a low save. Okay, it's behind 3 dozen spearmen with a much better save. This isn't a problem. Also, it's very easy for them to buff their survivability on top of all this. Many of their units have a feature where as long as each model is touching at least 2 other models in the unit, anyone trying to hit them gets -1 to the roll. Given that these guys are based on the ancient Greeks, you should never not be using them in phalanx formation, which means you should never lack that -1 to hit. Mages like the Cenari Cathalar are also fantastic choices because they can easily mitigate some of the issues that Lumineth have. I'll go into more specifics in the cons section, and trust me, there's a reason I'm doing that, but know that a lot of the problems the Lumineth have can relatively easily be dealt with. They've also got some big smashy units. The cow monster is an absolute beast and will be the bane of any terrain features you don't want on the battlefield anymore. Eltharion may not be a monster or even an elf anymore, but he's certainly a blender, and Teclis is riding atop his trusty spirit thing. I don't know what the hell animal this thing is, but it's got a pretty decent melee profile for a mage unit. With the right units, you can also just completely ignore the cow monster's degrading stat line, because suck my dick, enemy artillery and/or hero units, nothing you do matters. Alright, now usually is the section where I do lore cons, you know, the reasons why you wouldn't want these guys from a lore standpoint, but there are no valid reasons to not go with the Lumineth from a lore standpoint. They're the best. Love me elves, simple as. However, I will use this section to inform you about some propaganda that other players may use against the Lumineth, so you may be properly informed on how to counter their baseless accusations. For example, some people may say that the Lumineth are an army of crack addicts that can't put down the Aether Quartz to save their life. This simply is not true, of course. The Lumineth merely use it as a boost to their already amazing abilities, and the Cenari Cathalars can even turn the minor downsides of Aether Quartz usage into a crippling debuff on the enemy. Even their lore downsides have tabletop benefits, such as the perfection of the Lumineth. Also, they can quit anytime they want, thank you very much. Others may, as with all elves, accuse the Lumineth of having not learned anything from the Spirefall. They say that their hubris has only gotten worse now that they survived one massive catastrophe. I say it is not hubris, but well-earned pride, for the gods of the Lumineth and the very realm itself fight alongside these brave warriors. Truly, there is none greater than they, and they know it as the utmost truthly truth. Some insidious folks may even claim that their cooperation with other races relies heavily upon such things as mind control. In the section on Settler's Gain and the Battle Tome, an excerpt from one of the people in it says that they view those inside it as rats in a maze, and that anyone with a dissenting opinion is taken to the crystals floating above and comes back changed. This is of course true, but not in such a gauche manner. After a brief stay with the Lumineth, they are so enlightened by what they have learned about these elves and their plans that they change their tunes and sing to the heavens about how great the Realm Lords are. For instance, some of a lesser intellect may decry that the Lumineth use their human and dwarf auxiliaries as meat shields against an enemy force. Such is not the case, they're simply employing a basic military strategy. Their comrades are the anvil and the Lumineth are the hammer. They know that their stalwart allies will hold the line long enough for the Lumineth to strike a decisive blow, and each and every Vanari soldier is proud to serve alongside such loyal and trustworthy allies. If you still aren't convinced, then please, allow these fine gentle elves to take you to the Enlightenment prisms, where you will see how things really are in the world. Literally 1984, you say? Of course not. This is Settler's Gain. That's a completely different name. And of course, there will always be those bitter about how the Lumineth have come unannounced to save the day. So what if they simply appear one day and begin instructing you on how to best protect yourself from chaos? Can you not see how great of a threat it poses to the mortal realms in its entirety? The Lumineth know best, after all. And so what if they may push aside the defense forces these lands already have to take over things from here? Under their guidance, these places will become greater than they ever could have been before, better protected from the encroaching hordes than ever before. Such is the power of the children of Teclis. And one final piece of enemy propaganda to consider is that many people will decry them as more elves and therefore bad by default. For these arguments, I recommend hitting them in the face with a brick. In Minecraft, of course. Now, for tabletop downsides, there's some actual stuff to talk about. First off, their bravery is the embodiment of the term mid. While yes, their major characters in big units like Teclis, Eltharion, and Cowman have 9s or 10s, the average soldier and mage has either 6 or maybe 7 bravery. Additionally, if you haven't got a Cenari Catheter unit, every time you use Aether Quartz, that unit's bravery permanently goes down by 1. So you better hope that big drug-infused push worked, because if it didn't, the elves are going to be running away fast. Speaking of which, I actually just lied to you, because the Lumineth really aren't that fast. Hurricane units and their other cavalry are pretty quick, but most of their army has 6 inches of movement, which is hardly going to be breaking the Mortal Realm's speed limit. The Stone Guard units have a 4-inch movement. Continental Drift is going to be moving faster than they are. And given that most of the Mortal Realms are alive in some way, that's not a joke. Additionally, the Lumineth are decently reliant on synergy. The cow monsters only get to ignore the degrading stat line if you have an Alarith Stone Mage. Without the catheters, yes I said it again so you know that was on purpose, you're going to be feeling those Aether Aether Quartz debuffs hard. If your units aren't properly positioned, no -1 to hit for you. You need to position to protect certain key units, and for newer players, getting the most out of them can be rather difficult. This compounds on something in real life, the cost of the army. To get the absolute most out of a Lumineth army, you're going to need a bigger one. While their Vanguard box is actually pretty good, no real redundancies aside from the Cathler, you need more to have a complete army. One set of the Spearmen and Archers isn't enough. The Cow monsters alone won't be fighting at peak performance, and Teclis needs meat shields because even though he's tough, he's still primarily a mage. He's kinda like Guilliman in that regard. Use him as a mage that can take a beating, but probably shouldn't be facing down people like Gotrek or Archaon in a 1v1. Once again, shouldn't need to tell you not to 1v1 Gotrek, but just in case you missed the memo, don't 1v1 Gotrek Garnison. But to get back to the point, you'll be shelling out some dosh for a proper Lumineth army. Their models are also rather expensive as well, and overall, to get the most out of this army, you need not only a lot of models, but a lot of different models. Also, the only ally they can really take is the Idoneth, which lore-wise is quite the irony, but tabletop-wise you might want something like Stormcast, but instead have to have fish people. Ultimately though, their greatest tabletop weakness might be the fact that they're too goddamn powerful. Now I need to preface this with a statement of I have not played as the Realm Lords on tabletop yet. But that being said, from looking at their rules and what people have to say about them online, they're absolute monsters on the tabletop from what I've gathered. While they have weaknesses, there's few they can't very easily work around. Yes, some of their models are slow, but they're not designed to be chasing down the enemy, and there's other models in the Lumineth army that can do just that. Yes, some of them are rather weak, but it's easy to hide them or buff them in such a way that it doesn't matter much. Yes, their bravery isn't great, but once again, it's easy to mitigate this when you need to. Even their limited allied selection isn't that big of a downside because they have no crippling weaknesses they need others to fill in. And what this means is, aside from them getting more Tyrionic units eventually, expect some nerfs in the future. Because when the army is being properly used and everything accounted for, there's very few situations where any of their weaknesses are going to actually be weak. If nothing else, they're certainly not like the Eldar, who have various obvious downsides you can play into. And there's my do or don't Lumineth Realm Lords, or realistically, my do Lumineth Realm Lords, because you should take the Lumineth Realm Lords. I love the Realm Lords. I love them. I love elves. I will not be taking my medication. I love elves. Thank you to my channel members. You are the Aether Quartz to my Lumineth Realm Lords, giving me the boost I need to keep going at the cost of minor crack addiction. No, I'm not addicted to crack. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching and take care out there. Now, all this being said, it's still better to live as an ogre. Eat big, live big, fight big. 8 dwarves, 8 elves, 8 humans, don't hate 'em, 'em, simple as.